We're good to go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Snell Rodriguez, Chair of the Equal Rights Commission here in the city of Milwaukee. My pronouns are he and him. And I want to thank you for joining us today as we celebrate and embrace International Human Rights Day. It's a day that commemorates and raises awareness of people's social, cultural, and physical rights, fundamental human rights to all, and to ensure the welfare of our communities. As we get started, I'd like for everyone to maybe drop in the chat what Human Rights Day means to them, or what does human rights mean to you? So just drop a few words in the chat and we can share that with the entire audience. So thank you so much. A few housekeeping notes that I'd like to bring to your attention, which is essential. I'd like to, automated captioning is available and can be accessed by clicking on the CC symbol. And you can see that, I hope, on the bottom of your screen. Captioning will be available if you're viewing the program from the Equal Rights Commission Facebook page. Americans, and that, by the way, the Facebook page is facebook.com//ERCMKE. American Sign Language interpreting is provided, and interpreters, I believe it's Shannon and Rick, have identified themselves on the screens. You can click on the screen and select pin if you wish to have them appear on full screen. We ask guests to place their questions in the Q&A box, the chat. Questions will be asked at the end of the discussion portion of the program, and we hope you will enjoy today's program with our outstanding guests, their expertise, their thoughtfulness, and the stories that they will share with each one of us. Our mission at the Equal Rights Commission is to promote and protect equality, equity, and human rights through education, enforcement, and community engagement. Our goal is to eliminate discrimination and inequities in city government, in the city as a whole. Our focus is on housing, employment, and public accommodations, but we won't tolerate any type of discrimination in any setting, and we're here for you. So keep in mind, you can always go to our Facebook page or go to our website, which is milwaukee.gov/ERC. If you have a complaint, there are phone numbers, there's contact information, and we want to hear from you. You know, we celebrate every day, but we also have those things that happen each day to human beings that are tragic. And today, we learned of the tragedy in Kentucky and tornadoes that have killed over 50 people. So I want to take just a second here, a moment of silence to show our respect to the victims, their families, their friends, and people all that were impacted by this tornado. Thank you. Again, thank you for joining us. The ERC is honored to join the Milwaukee Human Rights Commission and the United Nations Association of the United States Greater Milwaukee Chapter, and all the fine folks and all these that have joined our team and come together for the 5th year to produce this Human Rights Day event. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to the chapter president, Steve Watrous. Steve, good to see you.
Good morning. I'm Steve Watrous. I'm the president of the United Nations Association Greater Milwaukee Chapter, and have been for 6 years. I was on a national Zoom for the presidents just a week ago, and they had a thing about what are you most proud about your chapter. And I have to say that this is one of our proudest things, that we're able to do this event with the city and the county, and for many years doing wonderful Human Rights Day events like this. And so I'm going to say just a few words and then turn it over to our panelists, so I can hardly wait to hear speak. For me, I'm president of the chapter. I'm a retired professor from METC sociology, and have traveled a bit to Central America. And I want to say a word on that, since we have Tim also speaking about Central America a bit. The United Nations Association is a national organization that has international connections as well. We have actually 200 chapters and about 20,000 members around the country, and just about all of them are doing something for Human Rights Day today. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed in December 10th of 1948 by the General Assembly in Paris, and has really soaring language. It's rather like our Declaration of Independence. It's a guidepost, it's an aspiration. And so it starts out in the preamble with, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, and has a couple other whereases. And then Article 1, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Not very long though, easy to read. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Brotherhood, somewhat dated language, but so it goes. I mentioned Central America. So the United States has its own soaring documents where we'd say all men are created equal. We have yet to live up to that entirely. And nevertheless, the United States presumes to tell other countries that they're not holding up human rights properly. For example, with China lately, various words have been thrown around concerning China, violations of human rights, maybe crimes against humanity, maybe genocide, etc. So I spent some time in Central America in the 1980s and saw some really terrible violations of human rights. Alas, many of them that the United States contributed to. So for example, one time I was in visited the port of Corinto, which had just been bombed by the Contras with super duper boats that could lob bombs into Corinto and that could mine the harbors. The Contras didn't really have a navy, so we really know who was behind it. That is the United States. On another visit, I was in the city of Esteli, where the Contras blew up the power transmission equipment, and we had 4 days without power. An inconvenience for me, but the US-sponsored Contras fatally violated the human rights of tens of thousands of people in northern Nicaragua during the 1980s. Very sad, and alas, that attempt to interfere in that country continue on. We have, speaking more recently, the wars that the United States has been involved in the Afghanistan and Iraq have had terrible violations of human rights. And I just like to reference Julian Assange. Things have turned for the worse for him over in England, and he may be coming back to the United States for further persecution and prosecution. The United Nations actually has a special rapporteur on torture, Niels Melzer, who said of the situation of Julian Assange that he showed all the symptoms of a person exposed to psychological torture over an extended period of time. And every country has had problems with human rights. We need to do better to live up to the aspirations that we have. If you want to know more about our group, the United Nations Association, please do check with our website, which is unamilwaukee.org. And we do have another event coming up in January 8th, where Eric Schomburger, who's the main environmental guy for the city of Milwaukee, will be our featured speaker. And so now I would like to introduce our next speaker. This time I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Tia Wong, who is a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she also serves as interim Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. She oversees the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that is responsible for advancing diversity and equity and fostering inclusion for all members of the campus community. Her teaching and research interests include 20th century US international history, the Cold War in Asia, Asian American history, Hmong history, refugee migration, and transnational and diasporic communities. Dr. Wang's research is global in scope, but intimately informed by her own refugee experience as a child. She's interested in not only understanding larger political and military transformations, but also the lived experience of those who experience wars, not of their own making, but fought in their environments. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. It is really my pleasure to be here today. I feel so blessed to be in the presence of my colleagues who are on the panelists and to all of you who are joining us virtually. I also want to share this good news that, my interim role will change. I have recently been appointed Vice Chancellor for DEI for UW-Milwaukee. So in January, that will be the new title, but it is really a pleasure to be here. I want to also say that I feel blessed to be in the presence of my colleague, Rachel. She was responsible for really bringing me to UWM. So, it's so nice to be here together. So my job is to keep us moving along. So I'm not supposed to speak too much, but what I'll do is we have 3 panelists who will each speak about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I do have lots of questions. This is a topic I care very much about. But as Tony said earlier, you can submit your questions as well. So we will prioritize your questions over mine, because the reason that you are here is to engage with our panelists. So with that, I'll introduce the 3 speakers all at once, and then we'll have them talk about the topics that they have been asked to share with us. So Paru Shah is Professor of Political Science at UW-Milwaukee. Her research and teaching interests center on democratic inequality, particularly in representation of women, women of color, and people of color. She has written extensively on candidate ambition and paths to office, and how intersectional identities influence policy. She also studies voting rights and the effects of suppression on voter turnout, voter preferences, and representation. Paru is herself an elected representative. She sits on the Shorewood School Board. Dr. Rachel Buff teaches comparative ethnic studies and history at UWM as well. She is author most recently of A is for Asylum Seeker, Words for People on the Move. And I won't read the Spanish since my Spanish is pretty rough. Currently, she is working on a novel, Holy Toledo, and a book of essays about migration and survival titled Thinking Like a Caravan. Attorney Tim Muth is a civil rights lawyer in the US and a writer and analyst on human rights and political issues in El Salvador. Splitting his time between both countries, Tim is a staff attorney at the ACLU of Wisconsin, where his work focuses on immigrant rights and on the criminal justice system, among other civil rights issues. He is also the founder and principal author of El Salvador Perspectives, a leading English language source of news and information about contemporary El Salvador. So with that, I think I'm going to go in the order that's listed here. So I'll ask Dr. Shaw to begin, followed by Dr. Buff, and then Attorney Muth.
Thank you, Tia. And thank you to the rest of the panelists for inviting me to be here today. I am going to spend my time talking a little bit about how we
Excuse me,
Yes?
Dr. Shaw, you're rather muted.
Oh.
Low volume.
Is that better?
Could be a little higher, please.
Is that better?
No.
Okay.
Is anyone else having problems hearing her?
Oh, okay.
It's very low. So we're also not seeing you on the screen when you're speaking. So, oh, there you go. There you go. Perfect.
Is that better?
Much
Yes.
better.
Okay. Sorry, I tried different headphones. Sorry about that. And thank you for giving me the heads up. So what I wanted to talk about today, and my research really focuses on some voting rights issues. And so I wanted to speak to how we find ourselves in 2021 with over 400 voter suppression bills being proposed in state legislatures. I think often when we think of voter suppression, we think of what was going on in the 1960s. And the idea that in some ways we have addressed some of these issues, I think, is really a false. And what we find ourselves in 2021 is, I would argue, one of the kind of most strong backlashes against voter turnout. And really at a time when 2020 was a landslide for voter participation. And so I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking a little bit about how we find ourselves here, and then also what these voter suppression bills really look like. And so I want to start in 2013 with Shelby County versus Holder, because I think really in thinking about voter protections, this is a moment where we find ourselves in the United States pulling back on some of the protections that we had put in place under the Voting Rights Act. And the arguments for that really were this idea that systemic racism and discrimination in voting practices were no longer present. That we no longer had poll taxes, that African American and Latino and other voting groups had equal access to the voting booths. But we also find then, as a result of 2013, the day after the decision is made, Texas announces that it is going to implement a strict voter ID law, right? And so what I think we find ourselves in at that point is this moment where states who have a lot of control over how voting happens use that power to create new rules and new systems of oppression for voters. And a lot of it has to do with, I would argue, ability to actually vote at the voter turnout, I should say. And really 2013 was the first time after 50 years of growth in voter turnout, minority voter turnout, there was a dip in minority voting turnout that year. And so we also have lots of evidence that this matters, that if we introduce voter restrictions, that there are groups that are particularly affected by this. And so what we see in 2020 is, I think, a really interesting group of dynamics, right? So one is we have COVID, and so an opportunity for us to really rethink how we allow people to vote in the United States. We also have a moment where there's a lot more suspicion around whether or not voting in the United States can be trusted. And this kind of narrative of the voting, that voting is no longer trusted and that we should be worried about whether our ballots are going to count. And so when I look to what's happening in 2021, I really see these voter suppression tactics taking on three types of kind of broad categories. The first one being restricting voting options for individuals. So a long line of research has shown that if we increase the voting options for individuals, so make early voting more of an option, mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, that's going to increase voter turnout. And again, I think 2020 is a great example of how that turned out. We did see, as I said, landmark voter turnout that year. And so as a result of that, I think what we have now seen in 2021 is a lot of proposals to restrict the ability to do early voting, to add polling locations, to allow for absentee ballots. And again, I think if we think a little bit about just kind of like what this is looking at specifically, the ways in which it is proposed seems to suggest that it's looking specifically to reduce the options for individuals. And we know that a lot of these restrictions disproportionately impact people of color, young people, old people, and people with disabilities. The second, I would say, kind of category of restrictions that we see are restricting voter eligibility. So we no longer have poll taxes, as I said, or literacy taxes, but we do have these new forms of voter ID and new requirements for proof of citizenship. And again, these have been found to disproportionately impact disparate groups of voters, but this is, I would argue, kind of one of the main focuses of these new suppression tactics. And the last one, which I think is actually the most insidious, is to really restrict how our votes, for those of us who cast a ballot, are counted. Republican-led state legislatures have passed bills that give lawmakers more power over the vote by stripping secretaries of state of their power and asserting control over election boards. So this is after we voted, taking the power away from those who have been given the job to ensure the counting is fair and accurate, to moving that kind of responsibility back to Republican-led state legislatures and creating easier methods to overturn election results. And I really think this is the one that's, to me, the most concerning. If these laws are enacted, state legislatures dominated by partisans could effectively determine which party controls Congress every 10 years via gerrymandering and effectively nullify voter preferences. So this is where we are again in 2021. And I think in thinking about how this relates to human rights, for me, voting rights is the ability to cast a ballot, have it counted, have your voice heard in a democracy where the expectation is that a vote is an ability to hold your elected officials accountable, to let people know what you care about and who you want in office, is in jeopardy at this point. And so I look forward to having a longer conversation about what this is going to look like as we move forward, and some of the ways in which our government is, I think, attempting to, again, think about how the federal government might need to have some oversight on voter protections, but yet have not yet been able to ensure that. So I think I'll stop there, Chia, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Karu. We'll turn it over to Dr. Buff.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Steve and Tony, for introducing the program, and Chia, of course, for your wonderful stylings. We're so lucky to have Dr. Vang as a colleague and as a amazing interlocutor in the world of DEI. UWM is very blessed. So I'm going to talk about human rights in terms of primarily the right to move freely, and secondarily, the right to be free from discrimination based on nationality and race. I'm going to be talking about people on the move, migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And my basic premise here, I want to say, is that people leave their homes when they need to seek something, usually freedom and justice, in political, economic, and cultural terms, and that migration, that movement, is a basic human right. I want to just bracket for a minute because I think these terms can be confusing, and say a refugee is a very particular term of kind of migrant that is certified by an international regime of refugee agencies that are both national and extranational. An asylum seeker is somebody who comes into a country seeking refugee status on the idea that it would be dangerous for them to come home. Both of these are subsections of the broader category of migrant. And I'll be talking about that, and it's very politicized who gets to be called a refugee and who doesn't. So the rights of people on the move are certified in human rights laws that unfortunately tend to be no match at all for regimes of national security. And that is the central contradiction that I'll be tracing here. So on the one hand, globally, we have migrants carrying the torch, sometimes literally, if you think about people carrying bags that they had to pack hastily of everything they wanted to take with them, literally carrying the torch of human rights against militarized xenophobia. So the rights of people on the move were certified in 1951. So that's 3 years after the Global Declaration of Human Rights that Steve mentioned, by the UN High Commission on Refugees, and by a subsequent conference in 1967. And the language is similarly lofty and beautiful. I always have my students read it because I think that we don't have access sometimes in these very contested times to very beautiful thinking that everyone should have the right to move. Everyone, when they're in another country that they're not from, should have the right to education, the right to work, the right to travel papers. These beautiful and important aspirations are almost never realized. And the example from pop culture I like to give is The Handmaid's Tale, a popular Hulu miniseries based on dystopian gender fantasies based on the work of Margaret Atwood. The fantasy in there is that if the people who are suffering in Gilead can get to Canada, they will have free medical care and will have open arms to them. And while Canada has been more accepting than the United States has, for example, in the last 50 years, there is no country in the world that treats any refugees like this ever. And that's pretty scary. I think it's in popular argot for those of us on the left. People say, well, if things go bad in the election, I'm going to flee. And the fantasy is that other folks are going to take you in, and that largely doesn't happen. Of course, it's different based on economic and other privileges. But basically, there isn't a country in the world that flings open its arms and welcomes people, all the people who need to be there. And that's something we have to take very seriously. The UN kind of had to leave it because of the nature of these things, up to individual countries to adopt human rights refugee policy. Or to put another way, national self-interest tends to eclipse stated respect for human rights. So we live in a country where we hear a lot about human rights. We hear, President Biden has talked about opening the country to refugees, but there's many a slip between cup and lip. And this is true globally for people on the move. And I want to amplify something that Chia often says, and that the Peruvian American rapper Immortal Technique puts as, "We are here because you were there." Most of the people leaving their home countries leave because of wars, not of their own creation, because of political persecution, not of their own creation, because of climate change, not of their own creation. So now we have what would typically, historically, have been termed economic refugees, people who can't eat and have to leave home because they can't eat. And typically economic refugee is something we don't dignify. We only accept as asylum seekers and refugees people who are fleeing political persecution. But those categories, I think, have always been very blurred. Now, this is true globally, right? In the South Pacific, we have the Pacific Solution adopted by Australia, which has led to the warehousing and captivity of refugees from all over the world who make it. Imagine getting from Afghanistan, mostly by boat, some overland, to Australia, to off the coast of Australia. Australia has adopted this policy of warehousing anyone who gets that far, not on Australia. So they can't, here's the kicker, they can't be asylum seekers because they can't set foot in the country. So we have indefinite detention. We have the same thing in the Mediterranean. The New Yorker ran an article last week about the EU's use and support of very coercive, very, very repressive prisons in Libya as a way of keeping migrants from coming. So migrants are often scooped up out of the Mediterranean and they're landed back in Libya. And Libya is kind of an interlocuting country preventing migrants from getting to the EU. In our country, we have a crisis at the US-Mexico border that, I don't like the word crisis because this is ongoing, and it is caused right now by the continuation in the Biden era of Trump era policies designed to make no one able to come into the country. We have an international border at the US-Mexican border. I've done some work there with the border rights organization Al Otro Lado. We have people from Latin America and the Caribbean, from Asia, from Africa, and from Europe trying to get in to the country through that border. So that is the phenomenon of the caravans of asylum seekers. There are Central Americans, there are South Americans, there are people from Russia and China who take planes and get tourist visas to countries like Ecuador and Brazil and then walk. Very dangerous. President Trump put into effect, as a response to COVID-19, an antediluvian policy from the 1940s, Title 42, which on the premise of public health, deports and refuses entry to asylum seekers. Again, asylum seekers have the international certified right, in theory, to set foot in a country and say, we need asylum, but they're being denied it. Also, last week, President Biden just put back into effect a very, very terrible policy from the Trump era known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, called widely by advocates the Remain in Mexico program. So there are tent cities in Tijuana, in all the border cities, of people who've been waiting 4 years to cross the border to claim asylum. And because a lot of those people are fleeing fairly nefarious cartel operatives and others, they are literally sitting ducks. They're living in tents. They have no protection. They can't put their kids in school. It's cold. And the people who are pursuing them often know where to find them. So we have violence and death at the border because of these policies. We have an ongoing human rights and humanitarian crisis at our borders. As long as national self-interest can be framed in terms of protecting borders, this will remain true. Protecting borders is kind of a common sense. Like, my students are like, well, we can't have open borders. And I always want to say, well, why not? We live in an era where capital and ideas and this Zoom presentation move freely across borders, and where people risk their lives to do the same. And so I don't say this lightly, but I think we have to abolish borders. I think we have to defund the global regime of militarized policing that upholds them. Vice President Harris in Guatemala this fall telling Guatemalans, oh, just don't come here. We're going to give money to Guatemala to help you. Well, the money doesn't help the people who need it. We all know that, right? The international human rights aid regime goes into certain pockets and deprives other folks. Our military budget would be a start. The several trillions that passed last week that, again, funnel money into the borders, funnel money for drones, funnel money to countries around the world to shore up their borders and prevent people from accessing their human rights. Rethinking our foreign aid policy is a start. The human rights of people on the move is and should be foundational. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And last but not least, Tim, I invite you to come on.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn, and thank you to the United Nations Association, the Equal Rights Commission, and my fellow panelists for participation in this Human Rights Day event. Before I launch into my topic, I want to take a moment to mention an important anniversary which coincides with International Human Rights Day. Today is the 40th anniversary of the 1981 massacre at El Masote in El Salvador, the largest single massacre of its type in Latin American history, where during El Salvador's civil war, US trained and equipped troops of the Salvadoran military massacred almost 1,000 civilians, primarily women and children, more than 400 of whom were under the age of 13. That massacre is a crime against humanity, which has gone unjudged and unpunished for 40 years. And it reminds us of what happens when human rights and democracy are not our centering principle. And unfortunately, human rights and democracy are under serious stress globally right now. Experts say that more than 2/3 of the world's population live under authoritarian regimes or in weak democracies that are headed in the direction of authoritarianism. And that movement across the world is worrisome enough that President Biden, for the past 2 days, hosted world leaders in a virtual summit for democracy. Now, some regimes are easy to classify as undemocratic for the lack of free and fair elections and the perpetuation in power over time of a ruling clique. We might point to Nicaragua and Venezuela as examples in the Americas. But democracy is not just about free elections. In fact, free elections can bring into power a ruler who will dismantle the norms and institutions which protect human rights and liberties. These populist authoritarian leaders represent some of the biggest threats to democratic values today. And to explain how this can happen, I'm going to be using the example of present-day El Salvador, a country I know well. So the current president of El Salvador is Nayib Bukele, a young businessman elected in 2019 by a wide margin. In 2021, his brand new political party called New Ideas swept national elections and took control with a supermajority in the national legislature. And Bukele remains incredibly popular in El Salvador. His approval rating is higher than 80%, the highest approval rating in Latin America and maybe in all the world. So if El Salvador has a president popularly elected in free and fair elections with incredible popularity, isn't that the very essence of democracy? Well, let me describe what has happened since he's been in power. He governs the country by tweet. Sound familiar? On the first day that his party had control of the legislature, it fired all of the judges of the country's highest court and fired the attorney general, who was at that point investigating government officials and allies of the president for corruption. The new judges that had been put in place then issued a ruling that Bukele will be eligible to be reelected as president in 2024, despite clear language in the Constitution that says the opposite. And then a law was passed that terminated the careers of another 1/3 of all the judges in the country. And political opponents of Bukele are being rounded up and jailed. The tools that Bukele has used to get elected and then to consolidate power and to persuade the public to support those policies are ones being used by authoritarian rulers around the world. And I want to highlight several of those tools. First is social media and polarization. Now, the role of social media probably does not come as a surprise to anybody who's listening today. Social media allows populists to talk directly to their base without any intermediaries. But more than that, the populist uses social media to whip up passions and loyalties, and by stoking division and polarization. So examples of this are Donald Trump, or Bolsonaro in Brazil, Modi in India, Duterte in the Philippines, and Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, all whom used social media to stoke division in their country, weaponizing social media. And when this happens, when there's rhetoric seeking vengeance, and then human rights are going to fall by the wayside. The second thing we see in these countries is attacks on press and the journalists. Now, Donald Trump really showed how to play that game as he began demonizing independent media that might report on him as, quote, fake news. If you destroy the credibility of the press, you destroy one of the key safeguards against authoritarianism. In El Salvador, Nayib Bukele started this even before he took office. He began calling the independent investigative media as people solely beholden to special interests. Then he took it a step further and has created a network of news and social media sites disguised as legitimate news outlets, but actually they are just propaganda mouthpieces of the regime. The third tool is using corruption investigations as tools of political oppression. The fight against corruption is incredibly important all the way around the world, but authoritarian rulers know how to use the rhetoric of fighting corruption to disable their political opponents. Political opponents are locked up and charged with corruption, but curiously, nobody in the ruler's political party ever has an allegation of corruption made against them. And numerous of the political opponents of Nayib Bukele are now languishing in detention, in prisons in El Salvador. We also see that dictators and authoritarian rulers around the world learn and copy from each other. In fact, there are actually political consultants who go from country to country teaching some of these tactics. But there's another important fact to point out about populist authoritarian leaders. Democracies can be at risk of failure when they fail to deliver on what is needed for the large majorities of ordinary folk. So when leaders in Washington are stuck in gridlock and are captured by moneyed special interests, it should be no surprise that a populist is able to capture political support. El Salvador had the institutions of democracy in the 2 decades before Bukele, but successive presidents stole hundreds of millions and promised to lift the conditions of people's lives, and yet it never happened. Democracies need not only elections and freedom, but they must deliver on meeting the needs of the people. I painted a pretty gloomy picture of democracy's prospects globally, as would-be authoritarians are using social media and political division to gain and consolidate power, but there are signs of hope. We can look at the recent elections in Honduras. In a result that very few expected, a left-wing popular party that had been overthrown in a 2009 coup was returned to power, and a political party run by narco traffickers was cast out of the presidency of Honduras. We should recognize and celebrate that civil society is more organized than ever, and that grassroots activists are fighting for human freedoms. We can celebrate brave journalists like Maria Ressa in the Philippines and Dmitry Muratov in Russia, who accepted their Nobel Peace Prizes yesterday, doing the important work of speaking truth to power, despite the ever-present risk of imprisonment or worse. And we see citizens armed with cell phone cameras become citizen journalists, exposing everything from the murder of a Black man by police on the streets of Minneapolis to the theft of government relief supplies in Central America. And finally, just to reverse the slide toward authoritarianism, we need to promote civic education on the human values of human rights and democracy. We must empower and support grassroots activists and investigative journalists the world over as a way to expose the abuses of those holding power. Thanks, and I look forward to our question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Tim, Paru, and Rachel. As I listen to you, I also think about how, how demoralizing things are in some ways, right? And the ways in which so many people fought so hard so that most of us can, go to the polls to vote. And, as mentioned earlier, I think about the hopes and dreams of people like my parents who fled for political reasons. But, it is like other people's dreams and aspirations too. People want their basic needs met. They have their dreams of having their children and opportunities for them, and our basic needs as well as opportunities and safety. So regardless of where I travel around the world, I see that families, they want the same things. They want good education, a healthy environment for their families. And if people have choices, they actually don't want to move from their place of birth. I know that for a fact. And but many people move because of all kinds of reasons that push them to leave where they are at. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. I know we are inviting our audience to submit questions via the chat. So please, I invite you to do that. But I'll start with a couple of questions. And I know that the issues overlap, right? It's not, a question is completely just for one panelist. They're intersecting and there are parallels and some divergence. So I'll ask this first question, and I think I'll have, Professor Shaw begin, but then I'd like, Professor Buff and Attorney Muth to also jump in as well. What human and civil rights concerns are most at risk if states are successful in diminishing the right to vote, or the right to assembly as well? What do you think some of the most pressing or most issues that are most at risk?
Thanks, Chia. I appreciate the question, and I agree with you. I think the kind of overlapping pieces of human rights and civil rights and voting rights, I think, are something that I look forward to hearing more about today. I think we're in a moment where we see the polarization and partisanship taking probably the strongest effect it's had in many, many years. And as we diminish the right to vote for certain groups of people, and again, and I think these tactics are very much targeting specific groups of folks, that then those groups, their ability to elect the person that they're interested in, their preferences around policies that have to do with human rights, that have to do with immigration, that have to do with the right to assemble, all of those are then, as we can see, will be neglected by those in office. And we are in this space, I think, where there's even less and less cooperation and ability to come to compromise. And I think there's this, we're, like I said before, I think there's this moment of kind of having us think like we can't trust what's happening in our government in a way that, again, I think resembles what has happened in other countries. And we can see what that looks like then as it kind of unfolds. And so I think, obviously the antidote for this is for us to vote in every election and to help others vote. But to also understand that like these things, if we allow these kinds of suppression tactics to continue, that we are, it's just creating greater burdens and, for those that have always had the greatest burdens to vote. So I guess I'll just end there and see what, and go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues. Oh, Rachel, you're muted. Oh,
I think we can just look at Wisconsin for a really good example of what Paru is saying. Wisconsin went blue in 2020 because of the work of Voces, Locke, and other people of color organizations. And so I'll talk about both. The phenomenon remains that the very people who have, who are most coerced by the voter suppression policies that Paru outlined so well, are the people who organized and won in 2020. So with Voces, the Voteros para la Vota campaign was tremendously successful on a lot of levels in turning out the vote, in registering new Latinx voters, in community empowerment, because you have a mixed community, a mixed status community. Some people are citizens, some people are legal permanent residents, some people are undocumented, right? So together, and you had a lot of people who were not able to vote, working for the vote, right? So as it becomes more difficult for those folks to vote, for all of us to vote, but particularly people of color, particularly people who are most marginalized, that organization has to work harder. People are then intimidated from doing other kinds of civic action. So you're going to be more afraid to do get out the vote work. You're going to be more afraid to turn out to a rally. There's so much going on about that hashtag Kenosha, right? Where it's harder to do things like I always go to protests. I raise my kids to go to protests. I'm now really rethinking that because suddenly somebody can come to a rally, a key aspect of our democracy, a peaceful rally with a gun, shoot people and claim self-defense. So, we're seeing a degradation that radiates. And what I'm really concerned with is, and this relates to some of the immigration policy stuff, people voted in numbers for Joe Biden because they believed that he would make a difference in their lives. And that sentence is the election of 2020. And that way, and I'm afraid that difference is not being delivered. At the same time, our voting rights are eroding. I will stop there. I could talk more, but.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, just a quick comment, which is I think we have to also call it out by name, which is that the movement to suppress voter rights, as well as the movement to suppress immigration, is a product of white supremacy. That it is a white supremacy political system that is in reaction mode against the changing demographics of the United States, as well as continuing the historical practices of oppression of Black Americans. And so it needs to be called out for what it is, which is the reaction of white supremacy.
Can I say one other thing about that? I think Tim's point is so important. I just taught the first half of the survey, which is not my area, but I like to do it. And teaching the Civil War, what did the South do as the abolitionist movement gained traction? They started repressing protest. They started closing down printing presses. They started sort of authorizing the kind of vigilante violence we see now. We are in the exact same moment that as social movements, as abolition gains traction, we see this violent reaction that Tim is outlining, this violent white supremacist reaction.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and I'm really glad, Rachel, that you brought up Kenosha, because I think what has been kind of the response about voter suppression is that it's not the same, is that we actually now do see the violence that we used to see, I think, in the 60s. And it's in this moment, right, where like you see kind of like the history repeating itself.
Yeah, thanks for your thought on that too, but I was thinking that it's also this perception that it's only things we see in other countries too, right? So really important. My next question has to do with our understanding of democracy. I know, Tim, you mentioned some already, but I also see a question from Dan O'Keefe about, how can he's heard a lot about the crisis of democracy, and what can he, as a 72-year-old retired individual, help with this crisis? So my question is, how do you think people in the United States understand the meaning of democracy? It's not just voting, but another attached question is, do we have the right to impose our understanding of democracy on people in other countries? I know that I have a lot of opinions about that, but I'll turn it over to our panelists, and maybe I'll ask Tim to start with that.
So that's a question I think a lot about in the context of El Salvador, because you have this president who has 70%, 80% of approval. And so the comeback to those who would criticize his policies are always, but he was, democratically elected. This is the will of the people. And I think it's important that we recognize that there is more to democracy, that there's more to regimes and governance that respect human rights than just the will of the majority expressed at ballot boxes. Working at the ACLU, a large part of what we're involved in are a set of civil rights that are your rights regardless of what the majority says or what the majority might enact. And one of the important things is education on those other values, those other protections and rights and liberties. The democratic elections are a fundamental part, but they're not sufficient. You need more than that in order, and education on those other values and why they are important, I think, is one key part. How you do that internationally, somebody let me know. I try, I write about those things, but who's reading it is a different question.
Could I respond to Dan's very good question? So I think we're all there. I was just talking to my stepmother and my dad about this, that they see a lot of things and they're upset and they don't always know what to do, and there are things you can do. I think it's important to support grassroots organizations like Block, like Voces. There are a lot in our city. There are, lots and lots. And, I think all of us would have examples of that. I also, to talk more about my recent teaching experience, taught a whole class on John Brown because I wanted to learn more about John Brown. And, there's the famous kind of more high profile violent episodes. But the thing that struck me most is that Brown was involved with a Black-led mutual defense organization in Springfield, Mass. It was a lot of abolitionists that had decided that they didn't want the fugitive slave law to result in people in their town being kidnapped by federal marshals. And so they got together and decided that they weren't going to let that happen. And they organized this kind of mutual defense organization. And it was mostly African-Americans, and Brown was involved as well. They would, kind of encircle people who were vulnerable. And the parallel for me is so overwhelming with contemporary undocumented people being preyed on by ICE. They would encircle them. They would, one of the directives was, if you are threatened by federal marshal and you can, get to a house of a more wealthy supporter and run in, so that the federal marshal will have to arrest people in somebody's house instead of out on the street. A couple of times got turned back and stopped coming to Springfield. And I found that an incredibly invigorating and inspiring story, because, most of us are not John Brown. I'm not John Brown. I'm not going to be John Brown. I don't believe in violence, a whole bunch of things. But I always want to know the answer to Dan's question, like, where do I fit in? And I think where you fit in is acting like a citizen, acting like an ally, acting like a human. We're talking about human rights, right? And the other piece that I want to say, and I know this is, Chia, what you were hinting at, like, no, we don't have the right, we as the United States, to inflict our ideas of democracy on everyone else. But part of that is because it has never, ever been about democracy when we've said that. El Salvador is a great example. It has been about our interest. It has been about the flow of goods. It has been about fighting communism and talking about democracy. It has never, ever been about the lives of everyday people and them having more access to political power.
Thanks, Rachel. I think, Haru, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
I guess my last comment I would say, and this is really just picking up where Rachel left off. I mean, I would say that her comments about what democracy has not been about in terms of our exporting it to other countries is also what it's not been about here. You know, has never been about ensuring everybody has access to the same things. It's always been used as a tool to divide and conquer, and to keep those in power and those without power. So I think, you know, and I appreciate everything Rachel said about, you know, this idea of how we individually think about our role in the crisis of democracy and how we actually all can do things. And so, you know, I guess I would just say, like, I think that's really a hopeful way to address that question.
Thanks, Paru. I know that we have a few questions in the chat, and so I want to get to them as well. But kind of just one more quick question about, I think it's related to some of them as well. I'm really interested in your thoughts about, you know, the current political environment, and, you know, why is there such resistance to people, right, who are on the move to find a better life? Why is that? Why is there so much resistance? And it's not just, you know, the right or the left. There's I think, an increasing resistance to anybody trying to come into the country. And Rachel, you mentioned earlier about the idea of, you know, we don't need borders, right? If we're really talking about human rights and opportunities, why now? There has always been, right, that let's be clear about that. And there's been, you know, political restrictions as well as all kinds of other efforts. But why is there so much, you know, resistance to people who are just trying to survive?
I think the most sympathetic reading of the intense xenophobia in our country, and we could all say bitter and snarky things about it, but I think the most sympathetic reading is that people are in pain. They see their towns folding up because Walmart is out there. They see their jobs disappearing. They see the prospects for their children not looking good. There's environmental and economic and political degradation. And the explanation that they're offered that's easiest is it's someone else's fault. They took your jobs. You know, when I first came to UWM almost 20 years ago, I had students who would say, you know, the union jobs are going and there are these immigrants here. And my whole class was like, yeah, both of those things happened at the same time, but that's not a causal relationship. But it's consistently offered to people to explain their pain. And we're not a culture that's very good at dealing with pain politically. Like, yeah, you know what, your town is a terrible place to live. There's a methamphetamines crisis that's not being dealt with, et cetera. If you're offered a simple solution, you're going to take a simple solution because we don't like the complicated ones and we suppress the real story.
Tim or Peru, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think building on what Rachel said, I think often there's sort of this false narrative of scarcity. You know, it's that this country of 350 million people can't absorb 100,000 people looking for a better life across the southern border, or 1 million people crossing the border in search of refuge, and that there are interests out there who benefit from a belief that we can't absorb more people, and that's a false narrative. I mean, and all of the economic work shows that countries that are most open to immigration see economic benefits from immigration. But there are those who benefit from the narrative of scarcity, the narrative of playing one group against another, and that narrative, I think, adds to people's belief that each person who crosses a border takes away from somebody who's already there, as opposed to adding to the overall diversity and wealth and well-being of a country.
Yeah, I just want to lift up something Rachel said that I think is really important to say again, that both the kind of hardships that are happening right now for folks, economically, socially, politically, and the increase in immigration can both be true, but not necessarily related, right? And that I think, need to think about these things as happening and not create these kind of false kind of connections between them that reinforce stories that are out there, and think a little bit more about like why those things are happening and how they're happening independently and have these kind of effects on us. So
Thanks, Baru. That gets at one of the questions that Maryland asked about, where can we get better international news on radio or TV? There's so much out there, right? But where are the good news that people can get so that it's important news that I hate using this word, but I'm going to use it. Well, objective about what is really happening and not sensationalizing it either way. So do you have some suggestions for Mary?
So this is not international, but my life changed a lot when I started. For some reason, we got Democracy Now! For free on our TiVo. I don't know why. And I started watching it daily. And I can't say enough good about it. It thinks globally. It follows the work of activists. So like there's a protest, there are arrests, and then Democracy Now! Tracks what happens, both if the activists are successful and the oil isn't fracked, or if they're not. It really has changed my political life a lot, just having a constant information flow like that.
Yeah, if we're talking about broadcast media, internationally, if you can find the BBC or Al Jazeera, are both good international mainstream kinds of sites. And on the internet, it's both a blessing and a curse, right? It is the source of all sorts of misinformation and conspiracy theories and everything else, but it is also a place with great varieties of information from quality investigative journalism sites. And one of the things I think that's been powerful has been the growth of some sort of nonprofit journalism sites like the Marshall Project in the United States that focuses on criminal justice, or Border Watch, which focuses on what is happening at the U.S. southern border. So it takes a little bit of work to identify, depending on what you're interested in, the quality sources of information. But there are so many out there, as well as so many really bad sources of information.
Thank you, Tim. Because of time, I'm going to try to ask, thank you so much, Annette Robertson, for putting a question here. I don't know if the panelists are, ready to answer this question, but Annette would like to know what measures are being taken by the UN and other organizations in terms of alleviating the current and impending human rights abuses in the Ukraine, especially with increasing, Russian encroachment. If anybody has some thoughts, or, I also invite Steve, if, you have some information to jump on and contribute. So maybe Steve, are you here or? Okay.
I am here. I was just looking at the way to get onto Democracy Now!, which I'll now in fact send to everybody in the chat. Be sure everybody to look at the chat. There's all kinds of good things there. The easiest thing for me is to listen to the PBS NewsHour and sometimes Frontline. Claude, as they are every media has its weak points, but it's generally neutral, doesn't cover some things very well or at all, but very accessible, and it shows 3 times a night on public television. And public radio is another source, I think, and if you listen late at night, you can get the BBC version, and once in a while during the day as well. Those are easy. I do think Democracy Now! is a good one. If you want to search around, there's an outfit called The Intercept that has especially good investigative journalism.
See, are you aware of anything that's happening with the UN, any actions with the situation in Ukraine? There's a question about that.
Well, yes. So the UN and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights all have great aspirations, and we need those as guideposts on what to work toward. The UN, of course, can't impose its will very much on anyone. It depends on the cooperation of other countries, and especially the agreement of the great powers, the P5, they say, the Permanent Five, and the Security Council to do much. When there's a dispute that involves any of those P5s, the UN is sort of locked out. So the UN can help on diplomacy, and often that does help. I would say peacekeeping forces are not going to be in order, shouldn't be in order really for the Ukraine. It's partly a case of, we here in the United States need to get the US to stop rattling sabers, to do everything it can to de-escalate in relations with Russia and China, I might say, because the war drums are beating for that too. And so we're in a kind of dangerous period right now, and we really need you all on the Zoom and many others to talk to your Congress people about not using military solutions, using diplomacy. And if the US really, agreed with that, the world would be a better place.
Thank you, Steve. Because of time, we have just a few minutes left, and I know there's a couple more questions in there. And I don't know if maybe in your, I wanted to give you each a minute or so for closing remarks. So there's a question that I think might be interesting for you, if you'd like to include in your closing remark, is it true that, capital and money can move easily across borders, but in terms of people, there's much more complex protocols. So if you'd like to maybe include any aspect of that in your closing remarks, feel free to do so. I personally think there's so many barriers that people have in terms of moving from one place to another. So with that, again, just paying very close attention to time and being respectful of everybody's time. I'll ask each of the panelists to, yes, for about a minute or so, give us some remarks closing remarks on these very complex issues, but yet very, very important issues that touch all of our lives, whether we think it does or not, it does in so many ways. So I'll begin with, maybe we'll go in the same order, if that's okay. Paru, and then Rachel, and then Tim.
Great, thanks, Gia. And thanks again to all the panelists and to the ERC for having us today. I guess, the one thing that I wanted to share at the end is that each of these, from my perspective, voting rights and kind of the fight for voting rights is an ongoing struggle. Rachel, I think, really highlighted how grassroots organizations continue to do a bulk of the work and are going to be really important in these next upcoming elections as we think about how we support others who are attempting to vote and ensure that there's knowledge about what the requirements are and how the changes are being made and what we can do about it. But to vote, I think that to me is, like in the moments when you have that opportunity and you can help others do that, to exercise that right. And it does matter. I know that we're also in this, I think one of my concerns about the political trust in elections and just political trust generally is that I think it leads to some more apathy. And this is not the moment for apathy. This is the moment to fight. And, Rachel was also, I thought, really on point when she said that we elected Joe Biden to make a change. And elections are about accountability. And it's about asking for what we demanded for a few years ago to see if it actually happened. And so these are, I think, important moments. And again, I think there's lots of opportunities for everybody to be involved. both in your own communities and kind of even in larger spaces. And so I just encourage everybody to take those opportunities and ensure that your voice is heard. So thank you again.
I guess I'll respond to Dan's question that Chia prompted us to in my closing remarks. Like, I mean, here's a question for you. Do you have bananas in your house? And I'll answer that, yes, I always have bananas in my house. I really like bananas. And bananas don't grow in any of the 50 states. And bananas became popular in the 50 states in the 1920s, owing to the efforts of a company named United Fruit. However, it remains difficult for people from the countries that grow bananas or to come here. Yes. So I guess that's fundamentally and ideas flow and people don't. And I guess if we're thinking about democracy, people have enduring ties, emotional, affective, familial ties that are transnational, but it's very hard to get to visit your family or to bring them to visit you. And I think that a model for democracy is to think about how we want to live and who we want to live with. And many of us have people want the borders to be more open, want it to be easier, just like it is easy to pick up a banana in your kitchen. Thanks. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for having me.
So what I'd like to do in my final minute is just give you some extra resources and some things that have been important for me in understanding democracy globally and some of the challenges we face. One is a series on public broadcasting called Dictator's Playbook that looks at a number of dictators during the 20th century and the common sets of things that allowed them to elevate themselves into power and get and remain in power. The second thing that I would encourage is find the Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speeches yesterday of Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov, who spoke about the damages of creeping authoritarianism around the world and how journalism and truth and facts actually are important for combating populist authoritarian regimes. And then finally, there is a book called How Democracies Die, written by two professors, I think from Harvard, Stephen Lewitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, that look at the erosion of norms and values and how fragile democracy can be. And it will, they are important for understanding, and for looking at what is happening, frankly, in the modern United States and how the erosion of commonly held norms and values can put at risk even a 250-year-old democracy.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Rachel and Paru. I just learned so much about the ways in which we're all thinking about these issues. And I want to, before I turn it over to the ERC colleagues to share this wonderful awards, I also want to say that the ways in which we take action, because so often we see so much on social media, we see so much on the news, and we're sitting in our homes here in Southeast Wisconsin. And sometimes it does feel like we have no power to make any change. And in some ways it is true. I can't do anything for somebody, in El Salvador or in Argentina when I've been doing research there, or in Laos or any other parts of the world. I physically can't do anything for them, but I think in our neighborhoods, we have people from all over the globe. They may live down the street. I think it's also we also live very parallel lives, in my personal opinion. We may be in the same neighborhood, we may be in the same campus, same institution, but many people don't intersect. We live parallel lives. So what impacts one group or one subset of a group, others may not know nothing about. So I think it's also about taking the opportunity to get to know our neighbors, to enjoy things that they enjoy, or to learn about why they may see things differently. And I think if we are civil and interested and genuinely interested in other fellow human beings, then we can take actions in our everyday life. So thank you so much again to the ERC staff and committee for inviting us to be in this conversation and for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I'm going to now turn it over to, I believe, Tony to share with us the Equality Awards presentation. So thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Long, and thank you all the panelists. What thoughtful stories and actually things that we need to keep in mind as we move forward, as we try to transform not only our neighborhoods, our city, but our country and globe. Thank you for all the work that you do. We certainly appreciate it. We also want to thank our award recipients this year, and we'll go to a video for that. We'll try this one more time here. Video. Third time's a charm, I hope. Here we go.
Bear with me. I had it
Yes,
today.
definitely. So many important folks. And while we do that, if folks in that are watching can enter the chat, what is your hope for 2022 as it relates to human rights and civil rights in the world, or right here at home or in your neighborhood? Let us know what your aspirations are and your hopes, or maybe some of the things you're very concerned about that we need to tackle. Your voice is always important in this as we work together to transform our lives and for those that don't have the voice. So please share. We'd love to see what you'd like to hope for in the future.
I'm going to try one more approach
Okay.
for the video.
Sure.
I had it running before, so
Absolutely. Also want to wish everybody a happy Hmong New Year. We celebrate your contributions to our city as valued traditions and families, recognizing ancestors and the joys that come along in the future. So happy Hmong New Year to all. Dorothy says that the human rights of all people.
Hello, my name is Tony Snell. I'm chair of the City of Milwaukee Commission, and I'm proud to recognize this year's award recipients on International Human Rights Day.
Well, it appears to be rather slow with loading up in the buffer. Don't know why. I had it working earlier this morning and yesterday's, so my apologies.
Well, we could upload it, I guess, to our Facebook page, perhaps,
Yes.
the video, and acknowledge all the wonderful recipients and award recipients. They are a terrific group of people, including yourself, Rebecca Rabatin, who received the Equality Award. And I just want to personally thank you for all the work that you've done with the commission, your passion, your selflessness, your tireless work. You have really committed and devoted yourself, not only to the commission's work, but to the people of Milwaukee. And we're so honored to have you along and to put all this together.
And Dorothy Dean had asked if we could name the other recipients.
Do you have that in your hand there, Rebecca?
Yes.
Awesome.
We have 3 different organizations that received equality awards. One was the Wisconsin Black Attorneys Association, also the Capuchin community, and then also the Labor's Union. And I don't know if I have exactly that organization's name, that works to ensure training in the trades for persons of color, and also for them to be active in project management type positions.
Milwaukee Labor Council.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also, before closing, I really would like to thank the International Human Rights Day Committee, people that met every other week on coming up with ideas and identifying panelists. And that includes Jack Murtaugh with the United Nations Association of Greater Milwaukee, Dorothy Dean with Disability Justice, Dr. Robert Smith with Milwaukee County Council on Human Rights, and Patricia Ruiz Cantu, a City of Milwaukee employee with community outreach, and Edwin Huertas, the Equal Rights Specialist here in the City of Milwaukee and staff to the Equal Rights Commission. So I like to acknowledge those folks and their work in helping bring about this celebration.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. And that was my next, I was going to recognize beautifully you did, including I want to recognize you. I also want to recognize our ERC Outreach and Education Committee Chair, Maoa Mua, who has been here working on this project and ever since day one, 5 years ago. So we celebrate all of these wonderful people who share their valuable time to make this program successful. Also want to underscore that U.S. human rights and civil rights abuses against Black, Brown, AAPI, LGBTQIA+, and Indigenous peoples must be prioritized in our country. And on that note, please tune in to the ERC's December's Lunch and Learn, Breaking the Cycle of Incarceration Through Technology and the Living Wage, on Thursday, December 16th at noon via Zoom, or on our Facebook page. Please check the ERC Facebook page for details, facebook.com/ERC-MKE. On behalf of my fellow commissioners and staff, we want you to know that we're here for you. If you've witnessed or believe you have personally been a victim of discrimination, we urge you to contact the Equal Rights Commission and report that incident. You can go to our website at milwaukee.gov, milwaukee.gov/ERC. Please also consider participating as a member of one of the ERC's committees. Your voice is important as we work to transform our neighborhoods and city. Again, our hearts go out to everyone who has been harmed by the violent and devastating tornadic weather in Kentucky last night. And we thank you, most of all, for joining us. And we'll see you again next year. Take care, everybody.